Your body deserves better than bad science. Hey there, my name is Britton and this is That Brainy Bee. I have a background in psychology and I helped conduct research while I was an undergrad. I fell in love with doing research. I also fell in love with supplements and herbal studies and naturalistic, naturopathic type of techniques. And I realized that all of those supplements and detoxes that you see people talking about, I mean, you can go to the grocery store and there's just tons of supplements you can choose from. There's not really always good research to back those up. It's not just herbal supplements or naturalistic methods either, because I was kind of somebody that took a very dogmatic point of view on modern medicine. While modern medicine and herbal medicine, both medicine, can be very dangerous and can have interactions, and sometimes even relying on the research can't be that great. We're going to talk about some of the common research fails that even seasoned researchers miss. So why does this matter to you? This is to help you make ethical decisions about how to take care of your body. Like I said, your body does not deserve bad science. So we're going to talk about some bias that pops up into studies. We're going to talk about Mr. Fraud and how to watch out for him. We're also going to talk about why sourcing and citing is so important and how to ethically do that, and just ethics in general. We're just talking about scientific ethics in this video, and then we will get into the dark side. So let's start with some basics of good and ethical research. For a baseline, you always want to look for the sourcing. So what is the references? What are they referencing? How old is it as well? I like to reference, I still look at older documents, but I of course cross-correlate and reference it with a newer document or books. I have older traditional books like on folk remedies and stuff, but of course I'm going to cross-reference that with something that's newer and has been researched. You want to look at how transparent they're being. Is it an open study? Is there open data? Is there open materials for you to access? And those kinds of things. How good the study is, so what kind of study it is. Now, I'm going to go over this in some other videos because this can get a little bit complicated and you don't really need to go over all of this. You want to have a meta-analysis is going to include a big, large population. So, but it's not always good to have a large population. In certain studies, it's better to actually have more case reports. So, like I said, it can get complicated. So, just for in general, you want to look for what kind of population are they assessing? Is that possibly why they're doing that size of a study? And what kind of study they're doing. Cross-cultural research is something that's very, very important to consider, and we'll get more into that as well, but you just want to consider the population. I think this is a great acronym that I took from actually Herbal Academy that I've been doing some of my herbal studies through and stuff. You think of the population, you think of the intervention. So in like herbal study, this is phytotherapy, comparison, looking at the variables, understand the variables, the claims, and the validities. And I'm gonna break that apart in a separate video, so definitely check out my short videos on research ethics. As I said, you want to understand the experimental methods. So what I would suggest, if you're not seasoned and if you're maybe somebody that kind of passively does this for your own wellness and that kind of thing, just become familiar with, like, if it says it's an in vitro study, that means that it is with living organisms. So it's done on humans or it's done on animals. I would say Google is safe to look up those terms and see what does it really mean, what does maybe the Latin abbreviation stand for, because that can give you really important context clues about the study and what population they're looking at. In general, you just really want to kind of go through like a checklist when you look at a research study and just make sure you're hitting all those points. Look up Critical Appraisal Skills Program, CASP, and I think they have checklists for you to check out. I haven't actually checked it out. Like I said, it's on this infographic for Herbal Academy that I'll put down below. In general, just be a skeptic. Like, honestly, it's good to not accept things at face value. You always want to do your own research and do your own exploration on things, you know, question things. Think about what would it do for a separate population and that kind of thing, because especially in medicine, we really want to be careful about who we're recommending things to and stuff, because our bodies react so differently to different recommendations, and it can have really serious effects. So you just want to be careful, and of course with your own body, like I said, I'm going to keep saying, your body deserves better than bad science. Okay, again, before we get into the dark side of like bias and Mr. Fraud, let's talk about the history of research and where it came from. So research kind of stemmed, well, scientific methodology stems from the 1600s, when they really started to formulate a structure for asking ideas instead of the depending on traditions and kind of depending on guesses and stuff. That's when it was shifting. And then in the 19th and 20th century is when the introduction of psychology and biology began, and all of these different ideas were surfacing about, oh gosh, there's so much, but for me, in my realm of psychology, like consciousness, subconsciousness, ego, of course, we know, if you are familiar with Freud and Carl Jung, those were some really popular 19th and 20th centuries. Not only were these fields of studies really surfacing, so was fraud. Now let's talk about Mr. Fraud. Cyril Burt, I think, in 1900s, he sought to prove that intelligence is inherited. And he likely faked his data. That was a very unethical study, I would say. Probably not the... yeah, I think that in itself, that kind of... the elephant in the room is answered on its own. There's been other frauds that we can account on, and now there's a huge exploration going into Alzheimer's research, unfortunately, and how maybe some of the images have been fabricated. By the way, this is highlighting psychological, scientific background. I'm not really going to go into medicine because I really want to do that in a different video. There's so much that I could cover on that, and I've done a lot of research actually over the past year on that. But as we can realize, there is definitely falsification, there is fabrication, and there's just things we really need to watch out for if we're looking at research. Now, this is not at all to say that those studies are just entirely kaput. You know, there's obviously, like we say, there's no wrong questions, and obviously those studies are trying to ask a question, or they're trying to that's what research is supposed to be, at least. Some people are maybe trying to just get their idea out there, and they have a really, like, they have bias, which is when somebody, you know, you think something and you think you're right, and you can maybe do a lot of stuff. Your brain does a lot of things to convince yourself you're right, but you actually don't know if you're right. That's kind of what bias is, and I'm going to talk about that in another video, because there's lots of different bias you have to watch out for in research. So, as I said, none of this is meant to scare you, so how can I make you feel better about this? Well, I hope this makes you feel better. There is lots of applications for research. It is so helpful for so many different people, and there's lots of reasons that it is in place, and all of these scientific methodologies are in place. And of course, it's always changing. There is the APA. This is for psychology again, not necessarily. I mean, it's definitely for medicine as well. It's just for mental health in general, but the APA is constantly upgrading, updating things, like, and that's American Psychological Association, if you're not familiar. There is a whole board dedicated to reviewing and approving these research studies, and you're supposed to pre-register any research you're doing before you actually go out and do like experimental studies or are talking to participants and that kind of stuff. So there's lots of restrictions that should be in place. Now, can there be corners cut? Of course. So this is how you look out for those. we kind of already covered all of these things, and we're just gonna circle it all back and bring it all together so that you can more ethically research and make recommendations if you are simply curious about wellness, if you're interested in maybe doing a detox, or even interested in healing your skin and you saw a treatment you're considering. Maybe your practitioner made a recommendation to you and you just want to do some more research on it. That's why research is important. It is so good and foundational, and as I said before, it helps us to make sure we're not just guessing on things. And even though traditions are so beautiful, and that's why I really want to cover like the history of medicine and how we got to be where we are today, and how we can really kind of combine well-known like remedies and stuff in, per se, herbalism, how we can combine that with like modern methodology, modern medicine. We'll go over 3 examples of different types of research studies that could be done. I'm trying to think of some, and then we'll talk about how I'm gonna review those and what to look for to make sure that this is a replicable, trustworthy source. Example number 1. So I'm really gonna try and reference this well. I will put this down below if you're interested in actually reading the study this is kind of pulled from. But the first example is we're looking at the effect that the color of a uniform in a sports team like wrestling, say, what effect does the color have on a referee's judgment calls? So how is this study done? So what you want to look at is, first of all, how open are the materials? Can you access the video that was provided for the participants to watch where they altered the colors of the uniforms? Can you access that video? Can you access the measurements? Is all of the data open for you to review? That's something you can kind of first breeze through, and if it's not, if it's very, like, for one, you can look at the language, and unfortunately there is a lot of jargon in research papers, which they do that on purpose to kind of weed through people that aren't going to actually read the research. So if there's not any jargon, if there's not technical terminology, that's kind of another key sign that you might not trust it. The second thing that I would look at, what colors are they using to alter, and why did they choose those colors? Because I mean, if we're thinking about the participants as well, obviously we want to look at what participants did they use. Were they voluntary participants? Did they offer anything in return for the participation? And all of these things play in on that study. So you just kind of want to think about those things. How was it done? How many participants? The genders involved as well. Maybe even if did they touch on the economics? Did they touch on the regions? Did they do cross-cultural studies? These are all things that you can look into. One of the most important sections you want to go through is the discussion section, because that's where the limitations are going to be listed out, and that's where the researcher can kind of get rid of that jargon, and they can really describe what their thoughts on the future of this research is. In cross-cultural studies, you always want to you kind of want to consider what is that culture. You need to understand the culture you're really researching and studying first before you really do the research, because you might get findings and you don't really understand those findings necessarily. Like, let's take some of the standardized medical tests nowadays. Some of these standardized tests that we have in Western practice might not align for a different area. They might not match a different culture. And I mean, some of the medicines that we have today, some of the very common symptoms, like different cultures deal with different symptoms. I believe, oh gosh, these are statistics I haven't read in a very long time, unfortunately, but I believe that African Americans are more susceptible to lots of different skin issues. I know heart issues. I know there's also Asians have some Is it skin issues with Asians? I do not remember, and it might have a correlation with the environment that they're in. It might have a correlation with the environment they come from, originate from. We don't necessarily know. Correlation doesn't exactly equal causation, but these are all things that you want to consider if you're reading a research result, especially if you're reading up on something that you want to try for yourself. And of course, understanding your culture is going to be important there too, to figure out where do you stand in that, and even genetics, genealogy. So then let's briefly talk about measurements in research studies, because there's a lot of different kinds of measurements, and this is where it gets really, really sticky and complicated. One thing to always remember, scales and voluntary measurements aren't always trustworthy. So if a study is based only on like voluntary reports, meaning like a Likert scale. So Likert scale is a common measurement in psychology. So that just means like, how likely are you for this example? So how likely are you to not enjoy the activities you typically enjoy on a daily basis? 1 to 7. 1 meaning most likely, and then 7 being not as likely. Well, here is the very unfortunate thing about measurement scales like the Likert scale. They are not entirely reputable because we are not trustworthy. Unfortunately, when we are answering these questions, some people have a lot easier time answering those questions, but I know myself, as somebody with anxiety, really hard when you're really thinking about that question. You don't know what the answer is, and if you're overthinking it, then you tend to kind of just put an answer down of what you think they want to see. And because of environmental factors, like there's going to be a reason that you're answering that, and with doctors you can't explain those reasons or talk about all of the confounds in that measurement. Mental illnesses, they have a, like if you look at DSM-5, we do it over a time period. So I think it's like you'll typically be observed for 6 to 9 months, and if you're exhibiting this, and this, or this combined with this, then you'll be diagnosed. But it's very complex and is very structured, but there is flaw, and that's the thing. We just need to understand risk analysis, understand how likely is that to affect me in the same way, especially in the health industry and wellness and stuff. If you're looking at supplements, you really want to look at the population that they are referencing and think about where do you stand in that population. So in general, for your application, that brings us back to that PICO acronym. You always want to consider the population, who is it talking about, and where do you stand in it. Looking at the interactions, because we always want to be careful about how can it interact with medicines we're talking about. Unfortunately, modern medicine and naturopathic medicine, they don't really collide all the time. Well, they do collide. Sometimes they don't flow together. So we have to be cautious about contraindications and cross-reactivities and stuff, which I'm also going to be talking about next week. Very excited. You want to do comparison. So in psychology research with treatments, they will do the treatment and then they will do a placebo, and there's a lot of ethical structuring into those research studies, but that's something you'll commonly do, is you want to, or even comparing it to another really good commonly used treatment. So if you're thinking about taking this supplement, think about what is commonly prescribed, what is already commonly used for what you're using that for. How does it compare to that? But you really want to be careful and ethical with comparisons. And of course, outcome. What is the outcome of that study? How did it affect those people? Is there any bad outcomes? You really want to consider that, of course. And what is the future? What is that outcome? What does it look like for different populations? What is the limitation of that study? That is how you do ethical research, because as we said multiple times in this video, your body deserves better than bad research. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I cannot wait to share the allergy video with you next week. So if you're somebody that has questioned maybe some cross-reactivities, or you're just curious about learning more about allergens, definitely stay tuned for that next week. And without further ado, do not forget that you are loved, and peace